In this video, you're going to learn all about ES6 classes. This is part one in a two-part series on ES6 classes. In this one, we're going to learn the fundamentals. In the next one, we're going to cover some advanced features. Then we'll continue on to actually use ES6 classes to create React components. As always, we're going to be exploring classes in isolation like we've done with our other ES6 features. That's going to give us a good understanding of how they work on their own. Then once we really understand them, we'll be able to use them effectively in the context of a React app. So right here in the playground folder, we're going to make a brand new file, ES6 Classes1.js, and this file is the one that we're going to be working in for now. So let's go ahead and switch things up in the terminal. Instead of running app.js, we're going to switch over to the brand new file. The brand new file is in the playground folder. Playground/ES6 Classes1. And once that's up, we should see an empty screen over in the browser that is expected. We have zero content in this file. So let's go ahead and talk about exactly what we're going to use classes for. The goal is to use classes to reuse code. So we're going to define a class, which is like a blueprint, and we'll be able to make multiple instances of that class for the individual items. So think of it like a real blueprint for a skyscraper. I have this blueprint, it's complex, it took a long time to build, but once I have the blueprint set up and I know what the building's going to look like, I could use it to build 7 of the exact same buildings. Each building is going to have a lot of the same features, and they're also going to have some things that are unique about them. For example, the address of the building. So we're going to go ahead and apply that same logic to classes here and to React components later. Let's say we're building a website to sell cars. We might have a car class. We create many instances of that class for each of the cars we're selling. Now, each car has some data specific to it. For example, the make, what company made it, the model, what's the specific model called, and we might have something like the VIN number as well. These are all essential pieces of information that are unique to the individual cars. Do some cars have the same make and model? Sure, but not all cars do. So we want to make sure that the individual instance of the car can define these 3 guys. Now, each car is also going to have some stuff that all cars have. For example, if we're making a website, we might want to be able to get a description. So I might have a get description method that I call. This would then return a string description, like you're looking at a used Honda Accord make and model with a VIN number XXX. So get description is the method that we can have access to on all of the instances of our car. This is the reusable code, and we're going to be making a ton of methods in the next 2 videos and definitely throughout the course in our React components. So let's get rid of this contrived example and look at a real one. We're going to create a person class. Each person obviously has unique attributes about them, but there are also things that are the same. So let's go ahead and kick things off by using the class keyword. We've had access to the class keyword for a long time in JavaScript. It was a reserved word, but it never did anything meaningful. We just couldn't create variables called class. Now it does do something meaningful, and we can use it to create classes. So what comes after the class keyword? Well, our class name. Just like we name our functions, just like we name our variables, we also name our classes, and they follow the same rules. Right here, I'm going to call this one person. Now, when you work with classes and components, you're going to see the uppercase first letter. For classes, this is just a convention. I could create a class with a lowercase first letter, but when you're working with classes, it's common to create a uppercase first letter named class, and that lets the user of the variable person know that it's a class and not just some sort of object. So right here we have class person. Then we go ahead and open and close a set of curly braces. Now inside of here, this is not a function body, an if body, or a for loop body where we write out various statements. This is something completely separate. This is where we define our class. We're going to look at the syntax for that in a second, but right now we actually have a completely valid class. We can go ahead and make a new instance of person. We can then see exactly what it contains. To do that, we're going to go ahead and create a variable, const me. Let's go ahead and make a new instance of person for ourselves. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to use the new keyword. When we're making a new instance of a class, we use the new keyword to tell JavaScript we want to make a new instance. We then go ahead and provide the class name And finally, we open and close some parentheses, calling it as a function. Now, in a few minutes, we'll be passing arguments in. For now, we're going to ignore exactly what those arguments are for and where they end up. What we're going to do is just print me to the screen. Console.log me. We can then take a peek at exactly what we get back. And what do we get? We get this little message right here. So here we can see that we have an instance of person. It's telling us exactly the class that we are building off of. And we also have an empty object right here. This is where we're going to have things specific to the person instance. So for the car example, we had a make, a model, and a VIN number. We would see that information in here. Currently, this person has no unique attributes, but we are going to go ahead and set one up right now. To do that, we're just going to pass some data in here. We could pass in objects, we can pass in strings, numbers, booleans, whatever we like, and we can pass in as many as we like. For our purposes, let's start off with just one. It's going to be a string, and it is going to allow us to set the name for the individual person. So this value is not going to be shared across all people. It's going to be unique, and we're going to provide it right here. I'll just use my full name. Go ahead and type yours. Now, if we go ahead and save the file, what happens? Absolutely nothing. We've passed this data in, but we're not using it anywhere. So if we're calling a function here, how exactly do we access that data? Where do we define those arguments like name and actually use them? Well, to do this, we're going to be defining the constructor function for the person class. The constructor function is the function that gets called when we make a new instance, and it gets called with all of the arguments we pass in. So if we want to do something with the name, we have to define the constructor function. Do you have to define one? Nope, this is perfectly valid, but we lose access to that data. If we actually want to do something with it, we do have to define constructor. So right here, the syntax is going to look a little weird. We cannot use a regular object syntax. So I can't, for example, type constructor, colon, followed by some sort of function keyword where we define our function and we set up our arguments list. This is invalid inside of a class definition. You have to use the ES6 method definition syntax we looked at when we explored arrow functions. If you remember, we start off with the name, constructor, and go ahead and double check the spelling, because if you misspell it, the constructor function won't get called. Then we move on right away to our arguments list, followed by the curly braces. Now in here, we have a regular function body, so we can do all of the things we do in regular functions. For example, we can go ahead and console.log test. If I do that, what are we going to see over in the console? We see test printing, because when we create the new instance, before we ever log it out, we have this function run. The function prints test. Then down below, we get the actual message from when we console.log me. Now we want to do something with the name, so let's go ahead and grab that. It's passed in as an argument. If I had multiple arguments like location, which got passed in down here, I would just set up 2 arguments. In our case, we just have the 1. Now, what do we want to do with name? Well, right now, we're doing nothing with it. So if we run the program, we're going to get the exact same output. There is no data showing up inside of there. What we want to do is customize not the person class as a whole, but the individual instance of the person. To do that, inside of our class methods, we access this. So inside of class methods, this refers to the class instance. So if I want to set this particular person's name, this.name, for example, I can do that, and I'm going to get it from the name string. Now we have something meaningful. If we go ahead and save the application, it refreshes. We still have an instance of the person class, but this time around, we also have a name getting set. This person has a unique name, Andrew Mead. At this point, we can go ahead and create as many instances of person as we like. Down below, I can create another one. We can call this one other. We'll make a new person. And this time around, we'll choose to pass in no arguments, and then we can go ahead and log something to the screen. Console.log other. We can save the file and take a quick peek at exactly what we get back. Right here, we have our second person instance printing where their name is equal to undefined. So do you have to provide all of the constructor function arguments? Nope. You can go ahead and leave them off if you want. Now we can also set up better defaults. So in the past, we didn't have a real way to create function defaults, and you would see a lot of workarounds like this one using the logical OR operator. So this would say, use the name if it exists. If it doesn't exist, let's go ahead and use something else. For example, test. Now the second person who doesn't provide a name is going to have test as their name, and that is indeed working, but in ES6, not only do we have access to the class syntax, we also have access to function defaults. These can be used in methods and classes and arrow functions and ES5 functions, anywhere you define an arguments list. How do we set up a default? Right after the argument name, we add an equal sign and we provide our value. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's a number. Maybe it's something like a function or an object. In our case, it's just a string. Let's go ahead and give the person an anonymous name if they don't provide one. Excellent. Now, if I did have a second argument, what would that look like? I would just type it right here. And if I had one before, I would just type it right here. So we can use our argument default values anywhere we like, and you don't have to provide defaults for everything. I'm going to undo those two changes, removing A and B, bringing us back to just having that one default. If we save the program, we can see that default in action right here. We have access to the name Andrew Mead, and we have access to name anonymous. So at this point, we have the constructor function set up. We're able to create instances of person and define what makes each person unique. But what about the things that each person shares? What we're going to focus on now is setting up methods that allow us to reuse code across every instance of a person. Now, unlike constructor, which has a specific name and gets implicitly called when we make a new instance, the method that we're about to define right here is going to have a name that we pick. It can be anything we like, and the function is only going to run if we explicitly call it. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. The first thing you're going to notice is that I'm not putting a comma after the closing brace for constructor. This is actually illegal. If I do put a comma here, I am going to run into errors. What we want to do down below is define the next method using this exact same structure, just with a unique name. So right here, we're going to have this one be get greeting. This is going to get a generic greeting, a string, and it'll take into account the user's name. Right here, we're going to set up the parentheses. We don't need any arguments, so we can leave them empty. And we're going to set up the curly braces. And here we are. We are at our function body. Now, what do we want to do inside of this function body? For the moment, let's just go ahead and return a static string, hi, and see if we can't get that working. If we can get that working, then we'll move on to more complex behavior, like accessing the person's individual name. Down below, instead of just printing out me, I'm going to go ahead and call the method that is me.getGreeting. So the methods are available to us on the individual instances of our class. Me is an instance of person, so me.getGreeting is going to call this function. We should get hi back, and that should print to the console. We'll do the same thing for other.getGreeting. Currently, even though both of them have distinct names, the message is going to be exactly the same. That is because getGreeting is generic, it's static, it doesn't take into account the individual person's name. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we would get that done. Well, right inside of here, we have access to this. We have access to the current instance. We already set this.name, which means that I could return this.name right here, and it would indeed work. I would get back the name for each, and Andrew Mead an anonymous print. Now, if we wanted a more complex message, we could set that up as well. Let's go ahead and add a little bit of text before the name, and we'll add a little bit of text after as well. Afterwards, we'll put an exclamation mark, and before we will put the words, hi, I am, followed by the name. So it would read, hi, I am Andrew, or hi, I am anonymous. Now, if we save the program, that does indeed work. Everything is showing up as expected, and we have access to this exact same behavior inside of all of our instances without needing to redefine it or doing anything crazy like that. Now, I actually want to take a quick moment to talk about another ES6 feature, ES6 template strings, which are going to allow us to create better strings. So we're going to comment this out, and we're going to look at this new ES6 feature. We are going to return a template string. So in the past, we used single quotes or double quotes, which have the same meaning. When we're creating template strings, we use backticks. So you can find the backtick key to the left of the 1 key on your keyboard, and it's important to use this, otherwise the things we're about to type won't work. Now we can put anything we want in here. Hi, I am, test, exclamation mark, and that's going to print. So if we just type regular string stuff, we get regular strings back. The cool thing is that we can actually interpolate values right inside of the string, which is just a fancy word for inject. So right here, for example, I could inject a value, and the syntax for this is the $ followed by opening and closing of curly braces. Now inside of here, I could access anything. I could write a JavaScript expression. I could type a static string like my name. That would print to the screen. Or in our case, I could just reference this dot name. So if I go ahead and do this, we have the exact same behavior. Template strings are just a little bit more readable. I much prefer this over this. Dealing with that manual concatenation and watching for the white space is such a pain. Working with template strings is a whole lot easier. So we're going to be using them throughout the course to inject strings and numbers into our strings, allowing us to generate little templates like this guy. Let's go ahead and remove that. Save the file, and there we have it. We have our very first method set up. Now it is time for a challenge. I'm going to outline exactly what I'd like you to do up above with some comments. And step 1 is to add a second optional item to the constructor function. So set up constructor to take name. We already have that, and age. And we're going to default age to 0. So default to 0. If no age is provided, it isn't for either of these. Both of their age properties will get set to 0. That means you're going to want to set up the arguments list. You're going to want to also set this .age equal to that value and go ahead and use it here and leave it off there just to make sure everything works as expected. Next up, after we have age all set up, we're going to be setting up a brand new method. This one is going to be called getDescription. And getDescription is going to return a string, much like getGreeting, but this one is going to also take into account the person's age. And the final format will look a little bit like this. So it'll start off with their name, Andrew Mead in my case, is. Then we'll move on to the age. So Andrew Mead is 26. Then we will toss on years, old, period. So this is the string that I would expect to see for this person right here. And if there is no name or no age, I would expect to see anonymous is 0 years old. So take some time to knock this out. Set up the constructor function, create the new method, then call it in both of these places and make sure you are getting the correct string back. Take a moment to pause the video, test your work, and when you're done, go ahead and click play. How'd that one go? I hope you were able to get all of that done. If you did get stuck, that's okay. Classes are a really big part of this course. We'll be using them dozens and dozens of times. To kick things off, I'm going to set up the constructor function to take a second argument age that defaults to 0 right here, comma, followed by the argument. Now we could leave it like this if we didn't want to default, but we do. So we'll set it equal to 0. Now we need to use age down below. We want to do something with that data. We want to customize the individual person instance by adding it on to this dot. We can pick whatever property we like. Age seems appropriate, and we'll set it equal to the value passed in. Now if we actually pass a value in, it's going to get set. For Andrew Mead, I will pass in 26, and for the other person, I'm going to leave it off, making sure my default values still work. That is it for the first of the 2 parts. Next up is to create the getDescription method. And hopefully you did use a template string for this, though you might have used regular old concatenation. If you did, I recommend switching it over right now and trying to take advantage of that new syntax. Right here, getDescription. GetDescription could be called whatever we like, and it's not going to run unless we actually call it. Once again, does this guy need to take an argument? No, but it could. Now, getDescription is going to return a string, and this is going to be a template string. So I already know that I'm going to be injecting the age and the name inside of that description, and I don't want to go ahead and actually use regular old concatenation. So with the template string, I can use that new syntax to inject various values. That is $, opening and closing the curly braces, and putting the actual thing inside of here. In our case, we're going to reference this dot name first. Then we'll move on to the space is, space, followed by their age. Once again, $, curly braces, this dot age. After the age, the word years, old, with a little bit of punctuation on the end. And there we have it. That should be it for the getDescription method. Now, is it called right now? Nope. Let's go ahead and switch that over. I'm going to switch getGreeting over to getDescription for both, for me and for other. Then I can go ahead and save the file and see what I get over inside of the browser. Right here, I get Andrew Mead is 26 years old and anonymous is 0 years old. And there we have it. We have a basic class all set up. That's it for this video. Let's take a quick second to recap. In this one, we learned that we can create classes which are like blueprints, and you'll notice that nothing highlighted here is specific to an individual person. This is a generic construct. We create instances of it. That's where we can define what each person looks like. In here, we have our constructor function. This is the one function that gets called implicitly. It gets called when we create an instance, and we also defined our methods. We're able to define as many methods as we like with whatever names we like, and these are available on all instances of our class. That allows us to create code that is obviously unique and shares some things as well. And that's exactly what we're going to see as we go through React components. We're going to have a class like options. Options is going to have a lot of the same stuff, but it's also going to need some data passed in. The data we actually want to render. What's the text for this particular guy? In the next video, we're going to look at how we can create subclasses using the class syntax, and that's going to give us everything we need to actually create React components. So I'll see you over there in the next one.